Great, and hello to everybody. I think that the webinar has started. I'm sure that I'll be told otherwise if that's not the case. And so hello to everybody who's joining us on Zoom and on Twitter. We're really excited that you're able to be here today with us. And this is the first of 4 Planet.Health unlikely conversations where we're bringing together people with blockchain experience and people with planetary health experience and those with lived practical on the ground experience to be in conversation with each other to see whether the blockchain can support us in achieving planetary health. So this is somewhat an experimental series as we have quite a range of expertise in our panelists, and the panelists, like you, some of our listeners, might not know very much about the other disciplines that are in the room. And so I just want to acknowledge that we're here to learn from each other from a space of openness, curiosity, and patience. And just to acknowledge that no one person has all of the answers, because what we're really doing is exploring the intersections and the edges of these two fields. Planetary health is an interdisciplinary field, and it recognizes that human health is interconnected and interdependent with ecology and the climate. Blockchain, which is sometimes known as Web3, is a distributed technology that can help with governance, financing, and other processes that can support complex systems. And we're curious about the points of convergence between these two fields and how they might be able to support each other. As this is going to be a shared learning experience, we'll also have opportunity to hear questions from the audience. And so for those of you on Zoom, you're very much encouraged to input your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. And for those of you on Twitter, you can tweet your questions to us on Planet.Health X. This session is part of a wider program of activities called Planet.Health, and you can find out more on our Twitter. And as I said before, this is the first of 4 conversations that we're going to be having. So just to introduce myself, I'm going to be moderating today. My name is Rita Issa. I'm a medical doctor and a planetary health academic, and I'm dialing in from London. And in the past couple of years, I've just become more curious and interested in the potential of blockchain in addressing some of our more complex and pressing challenges. And I'm super excited today to be joined by 3 panelists who together hold an absolute breadth of experience. So I have with me Samuel Myers, Tony Lai, and Nowella Koskey. And I'll let you all introduce yourselves. And so maybe we can go to Nowella first. And we might have just, Nowella, I've seen you've just unmuted yourself. Hello.
Hello, thank you very much, Dr. Rita, for that remarkable introduction. My name is Nowella Lilian. I come from Kenya. I am an indigenous Pokot woman. We are one of the few tribes in Kenya that are indigenous. I am a communication expert. I work with the county government in Baringo. But before that, I am a champion for women and girls from rural part of Kenya. So I run a community-based organization that champions for the right of women and girls, particularly on issues of stopping female genital mutilation, ending child marriages, and enhancing enrollment of girls to school for formal education. I was rescued when I was 12 years old, and when I made it to the college as the only female journalist from the region, I decided to do something for the girls to enhance their protection and promote their rights. My work has been recognized both nationally and internationally, and we've used a film to do advocacy to reach many girls. So I received an International Generation Award, and the President of Kenya also awarded me for my commitment to ensure that no other girl should go through female genital mutilation. I'm very excited to be here today, and I represent the voices of so many other girls whose voices have not been heard. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. We're so pleased and honored to have you. I'll hand over to Sam Myers.
All right, well, thank you for having me. Wonderful to be with you all. My name is Sam Myers. I'm a physician in internal medicine. I'm a principal research scientist at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I'm also the founding director of the Planetary Health Alliance. And we'll, I guess, talk a little bit more about what all of that means as we go along.
Great. And Tony Light?
Hello, everyone. My name's Tony Lai. It's an honor to be here with you both, Nowella and Sam. And thank you, Rita, for inviting me here. I work at a research lab at Stanford called CodeX. It's the Center for Legal Informatics, which sits between the computer science and the law department at Stanford. And in particular, we've been working on something called computational law, which is where technology and law are coming together to support the various different improvements we hope to the way that legal systems can work in more fair and transparent ways. Through the center, I've started various different research initiatives, including the Stanford Journal of Blockchain Law and Policy and the Stanford Climate Data Policy Initiative, because I do believe that blockchain can have a significant role to play in supporting global coordination around things like climate, as well as the local implementation and agency and empowerment that is necessary to really get everybody on board with some of these challenges that we face. I also held a visiting professorship at the University of Hawaii Law School, teaching a course on legal engineering for the biosphere. And then in my more professional builder roles, I advise on various different decentralized systems-based solutions to climate and biodiversity loss, work with various decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, or decentralized collectives, often advising on governance. And I previously co-founded a legal technology venture, legal.io, which supports with access to justice and the use of technology to support the delivery of legal services, sorry. I was previously a lawyer. I clocked 10,000 hours as a technology, data, and IP lawyer, and originally read history, thinking mostly about belief systems and rituals. I was born in England. I have a Chinese ancestry, so very interested in sort of international coordination generally. But I've lived most of my life over the last decade or so as a nomad, through something called the Embassy Network, where we've been experimenting with different forms of governance and commoning in autonomous and local communities and spaces. And so, Nowella, some of the work that you do in sort of those local communities, I'm particularly interested in how we can find these resonances in small groups and then look beyond those and how those can resonate out into horizons of broader moral change.
Great. And actually, so maybe Tony, while we've got you here, so you started off as a lawyer, but then actually to move into something like blockchain, you know, might on the surface of it seem quite a leap. Why did you make that transition? What promise did you see with blockchain? And actually, maybe for some of the listeners who don't know very much about blockchain, would you mind just giving us a sort of brief 101?
Certainly, yes. So as I said, I went into law through studying history, and one of the fascinations I had around history was our capacity to build belief systems which enabled us as individuals to coordinate. Now, that's often been turned towards various terrible ends, but that's also been the foundation of civilization, and also the foundation of a lot of the ways in which we've overcome a lot of the challenges we face as humanity now. Through then diving into the practice of law, I saw how, as a system, it had essentially been captured by various different institutions and patterns of power in various different ways, where that sort of existing power structures and existing ways of seeing one's sort of impacts and ability to coordinate and find sort of recompense for disputes and wrongs done. The access to that was very, very stilted. It was very much determined upon your how much you could pay, what kinds of lawyers you could afford, and part of that was that lawyers, in a sense, have a particular knowledge over how this entire system worked. 10 years ago, when I stepped away from the practice and went to Stanford, I think one of the biggest attractions was the idea that technology might actually democratize access to various different things. And I was seeing that with a lot of clients I was advising. And I think the advent of blockchain really built upon this wider promise of the internet, which was sort of at the time, from its early days, there was a lot of idealism around the way that the internet might democratize access to all sorts of different things. Now, I think what we've seen is that it's actually resulted in a certain concentration of power in different ways. And I think for me, blockchain, coming back to its basic premise, it's a system of recording information in a way that makes it difficult or impossible to change. It's this notion of cheating the system that it's trying to prevent through various different mechanisms that involve transparency, accountability, record-keeping systems that really started just over 10 years ago with something called Bitcoin, which many people may have heard of, and it starts allowing the transfer of value as well as just information. So if the first internet sort of layer was about just the ability to publish information, this is in a sense an internet for value and for reputation. And from my perspective as a lawyer, it's an internet for agreements, for risk sharing and for coordination, which is a big part of what the legal system, as I learned about it, was for. And again, opening up that access to the ability to coordinate is really what the promise of the blockchain is for me and many of the people who I work with.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good primer, and I think there's some points there that we might come back to. Sam, you started off as a physician and now have, set up the Planetary Health Alliance, and why that move? What was your interest in planetary health? What brought you there?
Well, I think my patient just kept getting bigger and ultimately became the planet. But in a lot of ways, if you take the sort of Hippocratic Oath seriously and you take it to heart to do no harm, and you're practicing medicine and thinking about how to protect human health, the more you understand about our reliance on our planet's natural systems, the more you start to recognize that there's just been a massive acceleration over the last several decades in how we all sort of through our activities collectively are transforming not only the climate system, but driving the 6th mass extinction of life on Earth and polluting air, water, and soil at a global scale and changing land use and land cover and driving resource scarcity. So there are all these ways that our activities collectively are changing the global environment in ways that are interacting with each other to really affect the core fundamental conditions for health and well-being, the quality of air we breathe and water we can drink, the quality and quantity of food that we can produce, exposure to infectious diseases, exposure to these extreme weather events like we're seeing all around us right now, even the habitability of many places we live. I was actually up in northern Kenya in June, and a prime example of a place that's becoming hard to inhabit. I imagine Nowella will talk to us more about that, but the entire band below the Sahel is sort of ground zero right now for a terrible sort of humanitarian set of challenges. So our transformation of nature is coming back to affect our health. And so the core sort of take home of the field of planetary health, which is a very new, only 6 or 7 year old interdisciplinary field, the core take home is that this Earth crisis that we're precipitating has reached a scale that it's become a humanitarian and social justice crisis. And so if you think about that, that the problem is bigger than climate. It's all types of global environmental change, and it's affecting every dimension of human health for all people everywhere. And if that's the diagnosis and you think about the treatment, really what we need to do is find a way to transform society with urgency and at pace in order to reduce the ecological footprint that we use in producing the energy we use and the food that we eat and our manufactured goods and how we design and live in our cities. And we call that the Great Transition. So we need this big structural shift in how we're living on Earth in order to protect and regenerate the life support systems that we're depending on. And those are sort of the core themes of this emerging field of planetary health.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And I guess just building a little bit on that. So Sam has spoken to the need to transform society and to change systems. And Nowella, you've had real experience of doing that within your own communities and really achieving wins for your community. And so I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about your work and maybe both some of what you're witnessing and experiencing and what the process has been like to make the changes in the community that you're living in.
Thank you very much to the panelists and the attendees who are here tonight. And I understand from the angle from what Sam has just shared, we are currently experiencing a lot of changes in system from both technological wise, we're talking about issues in the community. And my community has taught me about how systems enhances the livelihood of people. So coming from a very minority and a marginalized community, while I was growing up, with all the challenges that we experience in my community, like endless of them, and I've categorized them into three major categories. That is the social challenges, we have the environmental challenges, and of course the infrastructural challenges. So all these issues have built up to affect the kind and the quality of life of women and men of this community. The Pokot community are nomadic pastoralists, meaning they move from time to time constantly with their animals, and that the pastoralists depend entirely on their animals for survival and for everything. That is their food, that is their source of wealth. So with the changes that we experience currently, the Pokot have also been forced to adapt into different ways, which to some extent do not favor them as indigenous people, and which to some extent also have pushed them further and caused more problem than the existing one. So I grew up in a community that is also very traditional in nature. We practice this very low civilization and development in my village and in my community. So this one has for many times enhanced the traditional cultures that have been there, and which some in the current world are deemed harmful or retrogressive. So these cultures have translated to what we consume every day without necessarily knowing the harm that it causes on us. So let's look at, for example, the harmful traditional practices that are being practiced in my community. And we look at the aspects of women, the position of women, the position of children, and the position of men in this society. So the traditional practices that have always prevented girls from being who they are, from making women achieve their dreams, from even having women sit at the table to make decisions. So these problems, I've witnessed them myself. My story is very different and a tough one, I would say that. And the path that I followed is what I really need to change. I honestly want to make a change in a way that the world is changing rapidly, but my people are still in the same way. They're still in the same situation. They're still in the same nature that I was when I was young. So this is what we are doing. We are using the existing system, which are favorable, to bring change which we want. So we are saying the unlikely things that are happening, we are using it to change so that the girls will always be safe, the women will be safe, the men will also be safe, and they will remain. That is because the climate change is affecting pastoralists disproportionately. Their cows are dying. We are lacking water. We don't have power. We don't have infrastructures. We don't have enhanced government system. So these people, from time to time, when they are moving with their animals, they end up causing chaos because they are struggling and scrambling, they are scrabbling for resources, water and pasture. So what happened? The social problem that we experience that has been a major cause of insecurity in my area is cattle rustling. So pastoralists are so entitled to their cows, and the cows die. So what they do when they move to the next community, of course, looking for water and pasture, they end up engaging in fights, scrambling for the few resources that are there, and they ended up getting into a fight, and they kill each other. There's loss of life, loss of animals. This one has actually been accelerated because of the climate change. We also look at issues that comes with the insecurity. So anytime there is an insecurity, people will move from their homes, people will die, people will have to, adapt to ways that they are not used to it, like children will no longer be going to school. So all these problems, human crises, have made some of us and many other women and men from my community to either leave it like that or just adopt and find ways that they can actually survive in it. So surviving means they even go and steal cows from their neighbors. Surviving means marrying off a girl. You marry off a girl at the age of 13 so that you can get cows instead for dowry. And that is what your family will have to survive on. So this explains why young girls are being cut. They are taken through female genital mutilation because they strongly believe that for a woman to be a complete human being, she has to undergo female genital mutilation, which is total or partial removal of the genitalia for some time, and then she graduates and then she's married off. So when she gets married off at a very young age, this particular baby, I call her a baby because she's still under 18, she goes and produces. She starts her family at a very young age. The same problems that the family was facing is the same problem that she'll be facing. The mother and the daughter all the same. So that means they will never access good health care, they will never access good food, they'll never access clean water because they're still in the same locality. And they will never actually get into medical, they will never get medical services like maternal health care. So this is what I decided to do because I was actually, when I turned 12 years in my class, that was back in 2000, and when I'm 27 years old now. So I really wanted to become a real woman of the tribe. I really was looking forward. The community, every time they call you a woman, it's a very big name and a title. So my classmates, I was in grade 6, and we were really looking forward to the ceremonies because it's always a big celebration and pomp and everything. So later I was taken because I was not cut myself, but my classmates, all of them got cut. We were 7 girls. And later I made it to the university, but it wasn't a really nice, it wasn't a walk in the park because it was really hard. It's a story that I'm yet to tell in a way that will inspire other people. And now what I said was the changes that I'm making right now is only because I went to school and I was educated. In as much as the community does not support or recognize women who have gone to school, the impact that I'm already making is so that I can change other two, the other two will change other two, and that is what I want to see. So we are challenging the existing system of the patriarchal system so that men will appreciate the need of seeing a woman or a girl as complete human without necessarily taking them through those harmful traditional cultures. And we also look at issues regarding the extreme weather, which we are now currently experiencing. These events have brought in drought, which lasts for very longer time than usual. We have irregular and unpredictable rainfall, flooding and increasing temperatures. So all these issues have also changed the way Pokots carry out their practices, like their cultural practices. So they used to cut girls between August and October because of the raining season. But right now they are doing it even before July or anytime that it starts raining. So all these challenges, we are trying now to adopt ways of how doing things that we've never done so that we protect the rights and the privileges of every other child in TRT. So like, for instance, one of the ways that we are doing this is to use systems like technology to raise our voices, to talk about things to talk about discussions that nobody has ever talked about it amongst us, the Pokot. As a journalist, I use the radio which is a local vernacular radio station where I communicate to so many people at a time, and they actually get to see the sense where a woman and education and good health and development actually complement each other. So these are some of the ways that we are adopting to the challenges that we are facing. And then the last one is, for a very long time, the issues of gender equity has always been left as a woman affair. So what we are doing is I started this, and it was not easy at first, but we are having men talk about issues affecting women. It is not easy, like I mentioned, but we have a group of men ending FGM movements where boys themselves, young boys in the community and young youth, whether learned or not learned, sit down and make a vow that they will protect their sisters and their girlfriends and their cousins from female genital mutilation. Because all this problem stems from one issue: young girl getting married, getting a family without system, without capacity, without resources, and then the problem keeps on coming on and on. So that's what motivated me, and I'm very passionate and happy that I'm doing this. And in the future, I always say that I want this to be the generation that will bring FGM to an end and other issues affecting humans in my community. Thank you.
Nowella, thank you first of all for sharing all three of those aspects of your work. It's so powerful. It's so incredible to see you inspiring not just your community locally, but inspiring people around the world with your courage. And I wanted to touch on three aspects that really drew me into this whole world. That speak to some of the things that you were talking about. Those three things are agency, belonging, and purpose. The first, agency, this notion that you wanted to embed the rights and privileges and to raise their voices. This is so incredibly key, I think, to the broader set of principles potentially that we're trying to resonate and articulate into here, because this idea of agency, this idea of choice, this idea of giving the next generation of strong individuals the ability to speak for themselves and to choose for themselves, and not to have a patriarchal system, a top-down authoritarian, we require you to follow this approach system. I think the challenging of that, I think, is a big part of what blockchain as a broader movement is seeking to do by enabling individuals to step in and opt in of their own accord and exit and have voice to participate in the creation of the various different systems of coordination and collective action that involve some of the technology aspects of what you're talking about as well. There's a very interesting application of blockchain called Starling, which is about recording the voices and testimony of people who are witness to various different terrible acts or atrocities going on, and the ability for that to be traced with provenance is a part of the way that blockchain-based application works. And so that agency that comes with voice and the ability to opt in, I think, is a key part of the set of principles that resonate deeply with what the work that you're doing. Secondly, this notion of gender equity not being something that is solely for women, but something that men and whole society can step into. I think that notion of belonging and being able to opt into these new belief systems, essentially, these new approaches and ways of collaborating, coordinating, but also creating spaces, containers for collective trauma processing. I think this aspect is often forgotten when the wider blockchain discussion is being had, because a lot of the discussions around blockchain speak to the protocols and the logic-based technology systems that enable efficiency and coordination and the reduction of transaction costs. But at core, there is also this incredibly important piece around creating the containers for people to belong and to really relate to one another with empathy. And maybe that isn't a part of the actual technical infrastructure of what blockchain is, but I think in order to reap the full benefits of what blockchain might do for belief system transformations and the kinds of transition that Sam was talking about to transform society, I think very much takes the kind of work that you're doing as well, Nowella, to create those spaces to talk about issues that are often difficult to talk about and that often involve shame or involve ego, but that allow for that ego to be held and for people to be called in rather than called out. I think that aspect of governance, that modality of how we come together and move on together, is going to be a big part that needs to happen at the intimate local scale where people can relate to each other. And then for that to be seen as part of how everybody's shifting, I think that we can do with education and learning, but also the kinds of belonging that we create through these spaces that we nurture together. And then this last point around purpose, I think this is, again, this notion of regenerating our life support systems, regenerating our societal support systems. I think we look around and we see institutions of various different kinds that once held the trust that we use to coordinate crumbling for various different reasons and in various different ways. And a lot of that is down to both corrupt practices that go unseen, but also a lot of these historic patriarchal belief systems that haven't been challenged, but now I think with a coordination and with the purpose that we can see each other adopting into, I think there is going to be that strength to be able to stand up together. And so, yeah, Nowella, Sam, thank you both for the way that you framed the work that you're doing, and how I think this is both an environmental and a social justice question and a coming humanitarian challenge, but also opportunity. And I think by bringing these various different worlds together, but also holding both the logos and the pathos of what needs to be done, I think that there is hopefully a way forward.
Thank you. And I think actually, Nowella and Tony, something that you both really spoke to was the recognition of these sort of very much intertwined systems, which historically I think we've tried to tackle in relative isolation, you know, gender, climate, culture, health, and actually we're moving more towards this understanding that actually that it's all intertwined. And I think, Nowella, you described that so well in terms of the challenges that your community has faced, and also the work that you're doing. And Sam, I know that Planetary Health is very much a field which tries to bridge across these different systems that are in themselves quite complicated. How does Planetary Health begin to grapple with that?
Yeah, I love this conversation. I'm learning so much more than I'm contributing, which is always the sign of a good conversation. I think you're right. I mean, there's so much to think about here. You know, the sort of birth of Planetary Health out sort of into the public domain as a field came with the publication of something called the Rockefeller Lancet Commission report on Planetary Health, which was titled Safeguarding Human Health in the Anthropocene, and it was published in 2015, and that's really when the field kind of took off. And when we wrote that report, you know, we talked about the different challenges we faced and their knowledge challenges and the need for science and all the sort of traditional thing. But I think the most interesting set of challenges were the ones that we called the challenges of imagination. And I think that's what both Tony and Nowella have been speaking to. I mean, I'm hearing Nowella really talk about reimagining identity within her Indigenous community, which is a pretty courageous thing to be trying to do. And I think we actually need to be reimagining identity as human beings on the planet. And so for me, this has been a sort of long journey of sort of discovering my ignorance on level after level after level. But you know, what I thought was a sort of global ecological crisis has morphed into a global health and humanitarian crisis. And I think when you go down below that, you start to see something even more interesting, which is sort of a crisis of identity, or even a sort of spiritual crisis in this kind of ruptured relationship between humanity and the natural world. And you know, so many of us, I think, individually, when we're out in particular kinds of natural spaces, feel something that we would describe as reverence or awe for certain natural systems, and yet the reverence and awe that we might feel has somehow lost its agency in guiding our collective decisions and how we interact with the world. And so there's this sense of sort of needing to rethink not only our sort of the technical aspects of all of this in the great transition, precision agriculture and all of these innovations, but sort of rethink our emotional, spiritual relationship to the natural world, our relationships with each other, which is what Nowella is talking about, to sort of create a global paradigm shift. And another theme in what Nowella was talking about that I find, well, there are a couple that I find really interesting. One is just sort of activism and collective action. And I think that comes up over and over and over. The panel I was on right before this, I was working with a young woman from Egypt who's done incredible work and is going to be the youth leading rep to the COP27 process as a physician working in Planetary Health. But she was talking about sort of youth activism. And I think that we're seeing, sort of all around the world, these sort of bright lights of youth activists kind of coming together. And I think the more that we can network them, and I'm curious, where technology comes in this, but the more they can be connected with each other, the more of a force they can be, because so many of the problems that we're facing are sort of power problems where we need to build power through movement building and collective action. And I think the other theme is this youth leadership role, because I think if we're rethinking who we are and our relationships to nature and to each other and our identity, that youth have a really, really, really central and should be sort of leading voice in that process, both because they have the most at stake. They probably have the most ability to actually transform. The rest of us may be more set in our ways, a lot of imagination. So I think this role for youth activism is also really important. But no, you're right. I mean, that the field of planetary health is fundamentally very holistic, and it's sort of recognition that these problems are all sort of interconnected. It doesn't mean that we have to sort of get paralyzed by the complexity of the problem. They're very, very concrete, specific solutions that we can entertain in every domain, and we need to be doing that. But we do need to understand the interconnected nature of the problems that we're facing, for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I'm really enjoying what a rich discussion this is, and actually how so much of what is coming up feels very much like rooted and grounded in like the natural world, in the relationship that we might have with the human and the non-human world, in our interrelationality. And there's something for me that feels actually quite disconnected about the blockchain with that it's this technology that, that's potentially intangible. And so I want to ask you a little bit about that, Tony, but I also want to recognize that there have been a couple of questions that have come through, primarily around blockchain. And so maybe we just need to do a little bit more of like an update. So one of the questions is, what's the difference between blockchain and Web3? Often those are terms that are used, that are used together, but is there a difference between them? And also something about blockchain and Web3 being quite opaque to a large number of people, and how can they become more accessible? And maybe there's an answer that links all of those themes together.
Thank you, Rita. And yeah, thank you, Sam, also just for, I think, relating it to this notion of ecological patterns that then spread into health, humanitarian, identity, and spiritual related issues. And I think this is somewhat looking at this space with a healthy dose of collective imagination, because on the baseline, just to speak to the difference between blockchain and Web3, blockchain really is just a technology in terms of a way of achieving what's called consensus, which is essentially like the agreement of what's on the ledger, what's on this record keeping layer that everybody can agree upon without a centralized actor. And that potentially has various different use cases, and that's just open to the imagination as to what can be built using that layer of infrastructure. And Web3 as a sort of imagination space, a collective imagination space, is built on top of that sort of underlying infrastructural layer of blockchain. And really what Web3 is about is this broader notion of what might a future version of the internet look like. We had Web 1, which was sort of websites, Web 2, which was sort of social media and Facebook and, you know, centralized platforms really sort of controlling, you know, your accounts and your identity. And Web 3 is this notion that you get to reclaim your identity amidst this sort of crisis of identity. We've suddenly got this approach where we get to create a layer of applications, online services, finance, ecological coordination, various different sort of imagined and then built application layers, which involve these core aspects of agency, purpose, the ability to, you know, act without, you know, being tied into a, you know, a system that might actually be, you know, operating against you. And I think that's one of the key issues with the sort of current Web 2 internet, is that many of the platforms where we're operating and interacting actually don't have fully aligned incentives. They may be trying to sell us something. They may be trying to sort of curate our news feed to actually get us to spend more time online, rather than getting us to go out and engage with a collective that might actually bring us more spiritual, economic, social meaning, which is essentially what we get to do with this new layer of Web3, this new application of blockchain that allows us to really align ourselves with organizations, with other people who believe in the same things that we do, who have the same sets of values as we do, and maybe who consider value on completely different dimensions that we don't get to see in the wider sort of system, the sort of existing economic or social system. We get to create a new set of beliefs around, for example, the right and rightness of women to go to school, and these alternate value frameworks can involve actually having a deeper sense of intimacy between ourselves and any of the beings and happenings that we hold meaningful, whether that's a forest or a river, or that's the education of like the children in our community with agency and the ability to, you know, direct their own sort of value frameworks, you know, collectively as well. And I think when we think about different aspects of what blockchain can enable, what Web3 as applications are building on top of that, it really does involve this new way of seeing. And I think this is the you know, part of the transition is actually going to evolve both our collective sense making, our collective perception capabilities, as well as our collective action capabilities. And this is this combination of awareness flow and resource flow that, when coordinated, and where we're actually able to understand that, you know, ourselves as individuals can safely be, you know, in a sense, let go of and into a wider collective self, because there is that value alignment. I think that sense of belonging and community, you know, and the infrastructure from both a technical but also from an emotional and spiritual perspective can really come into play. And that, I think, and I hope, and this is a big part of what we're working with artists and musicians, as well as technologists and governance experts, is to weave that sense of belonging and sense of relationship and sense of collective consciousness really with nature, with the environments around us. Because I think that intimacy to nature will be foundational to the change that our world needs to really feel and act on for humanity to survive and thrive.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, a question, like a general theme of some questions that is coming through is this question of like, how could these technologies be applied in somewhere like your community, Nowella? And I know that you spoke a little to the fact that you are using some technologies at the moment, but maybe you can speak a little bit to that, like what has worked, what doesn't work, like what is feasible.
Thank you, Dr. Rita. And that's a very interesting question as far as advocacy is concerned in my community. So I'm giving you very practical examples of things that we have actually started using it, and some of these things that have actually worked to some extent than we expected. So the first one is actually about the radio talk shows program, which is it's always a 2-hour discussion or dialogue. And I talk, the most important part of the discussion is always educating people on the existing legal framework, what the law says about 1, 2, 3. And then the second part of the discussion is always to sensitize the audiences on what they should actually do in the event of 1, 2, 3. So like, we take this discussion seriously. And at first, my community would never allow a young girl to talk about issues addressing the community. So it was very hard for me to stand in front of a huge crowd of people and telling them that, oh, I am a young girl, I went to school, and it was very hard for me. And some instances, even after all the planning, all the mobilization, the training or the meeting never happened, and they are very hostile, which I understand, because for them, a young girl who did not conform to the ways of the tribe could not talk to them. But now here I am, I'm very protected behind the microphone, and I go ahead and talk to them. The first day we did our radio talk show on women and girls, very few people called to congratulate or to even contribute to our discussion. But the second one, which actually happened that was in 2020 during COVID, the calls were flooding. We were supposed to go for 2 hours, but the radio gave us an overtime of 2 hours. And it was a very interesting discussion, because at the end of the day, people acknowledge the fact that, one, people are suffering. Secondly, they were resonating to what I was telling them regarding issues of promotion and upholding the dignity of everybody in the community. So this is and nobody will actually come and beat me when I'm talking on the radio. So it's very good, but again, it's like, I'm using this channel just as a model. This is a channel for you to hear. So if you don't agree with it, fine. If you agree with it, and through this method, we've managed to rescue so many girls who talk to people they know in the community, who are our community champions whenever they are at risk, and they can easily reach me without me necessarily going to the village or knowing that they actually exist. The other thing that we are also doing this particular time is using the internet, of course, because I can read from the internet whatever I need as far as issues of kitchen gardening is concerned. This is an area with very low rain. So with a very small group of women in my village, 30 women, very young mothers. Some of them are actually younger than me, but they have big families, like 8 children. So we are not agriculturalists in nature. We just keep animals, but we don't practice crop farming. So we learned this, and a lady came and talked to them about kitchen gardening. And as we speak right away, even the lady who's our next door neighbor, who was actually facing all these sorts of problems of gender-based violence because the husband was very violent, she can now sell some vegetable to cater for the needs of the family. And within no time, in a span of 6 months, the level of malnutrition has drastically dropped, because so many children were malnourished. Secondly, the women don't have to depend on their husband all the time, because their husband don't even provide very much. They are actually moving with their cows. So sometimes issues of hunger affected them very much, but this time round they plant, they go sell, they get money, they can buy things that complement their household. And then this is one thing that we are really looking forward to read. And then there's the last one, which is actually the honey project. We harvest honey because we have very good honey in Tiati in my village. It's called Tiati. And the women actually, we collected the honey we harvested, and then we repackage and sell. So after selling, we realized that we were making this profit, which actually assisted the women in the group to take their girls to school. So we are buying school uniform and the stationaries to enable them meet the needs of their girls, so that their girls will not have to drop out of school to come and cater for this. So all these are very practical, because the people we are dealing with are people who have never gone to school. They're people who don't have this knowledge. They're people who are not exposed. And we are also having broken system, no representation. And with time now, I've seen these ladies, from nowhere, they can now attend public participations for the government when they are discussing development issues around the ward or around the county. And these women are now getting spaces. They are now sitting at the tables where decision making is being made. And this is a very great milestone because at least they can talk about how they're suffering because of lack of amenities like hospitals. They are also speaking up their mind on what they think will work for them and their generation to come. So enhancing their attendance or building their capacity, just knowledge-wise to know what is needed. It also helps other women. They become role models, something that we were lacking for a very long time. So these women make changes through their lives in the village. And now I talk of women who, all of them, the 30 of them, they have children in school. And these children are doing very well because they are getting better lives than the other children. And the other children in school wish that their parents could also join the group. And that is how we are growing. We started as 7 of us. We are now at 30 and maybe we'll get even to 500. So thank you.
Thank you. It's just really exciting to hear what's happening on the ground. And I think what I'm also curious about and what I'm beginning to see more is actually the application of Web3 technologies, these technologies of imagination and ownership and agency in communities like yours. And I think we're actually seeing this across the board, not just with Web3, but also with climate technologies as well, that often these spaces are leapfrogging almost out of necessity and moving towards the use of an uptake of these technologies. I definitely know that from Lebanon, which is where my family is from, with such a corrupt and unstable economic system. It makes sense within that environment to move towards using something like cryptocurrencies, which are on the blockchain, because that way you can maintain some level of personal agency separate to, for example, the banking system or the state. Something that I just want to speak to very briefly, a couple of questions that have come through, I think quite valid questions around blockchain technologies and energy expenditure. And perhaps Tony can elaborate on this a little bit more. But what I am aware of is that recently the Ethereum network, which is the second largest, I guess, blockchain network, reduced its energy expenditure by 99.5% just in the last couple of months. And actually, there are very, very, very few industries which have responded so rapidly and comprehensively to their energy usage. And so that's something which I hope, and I think we will begin to see across the board with blockchain. But maybe, Tony, if you could speak just a little bit to that as well. I think it's a valid concern.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for bringing it up. I think if we're talking about using any form of infrastructure or technology to support climate action and ecological awareness and protection, then we absolutely should be looking at the impact of the technology and infrastructure itself. And that's something that you're seeing a lot of the various different crypto protocols and organizations stepping into very proactively. The Filecoin, which operates a decentralized storage protocol called IPFS. They have a specific wing called Filecoin Green that is not just looking at the impact of their storage system itself, which, just to go technical for a moment, isn't based on the same proof of work algorithm that Bitcoin is, but they operate on something called proof of space, because it's about storing your files in a distributed way, akin to how you might do that with Amazon Web Services, but again, this is decentralized and can't be cut off. But again, just coming back to the point there, both assessing and monitoring the amount of sort of carbon impact that their operations are having. They're not just offsetting those, but developing out the standards and sort of ways in which that can be done by all the other participants in the ecosystem. And we're seeing a lot of the people who care about this wider notion of climate accounting and accounting for our carbon impact, but also our environmental impact in all of these other different areas, including biodiversity preservation, turning to systems of blockchain-based infrastructure in order to fill in a lot of the gaps that currently exist within our wider sort of very, very complex system for measuring our impact on the planet. And currently there are huge gaps in that, from both jurisdictional gaps, such as the fact that, the oceans that account for a huge portion of our sort of carbon sort of drawdown budget are not under the jurisdiction of any particular nation state, and likewise with cities, or the impact of various different people. That's all being done at the nation state level, and it's all voluntary. And so I guess this wider point is that there are various different efforts underway to reduce the carbon and environmental impact of the sort of infrastructure as a whole. But at the same time, there are a lot of incredible efforts being done to actually utilize the infrastructure to fill in a lot of the ways in which we really can hopefully coordinate around some of the commitments that were made at the Paris Accords that are being discussed in these various different fora at, for example, COP. And I guess one of the things that's, again, going back to this fundamental potential of blockchain, the international machinery of climate negotiations kind of grinds on, where you have these different representations of countries arguing their positions, making commitments, but again, there isn't any real framework for enforcement, let alone like the tracking and ability to understand all of that. And one of the aspects of these ecosystem-based approaches that involve looking at the interconnections between the different impacts is that they allow ways for us to both see and recognize different categories of actions, coordinate around them, and have those both enforced against and rewarded for. And so we can actually look at how we set up some of the funds that are being set aside for climate mitigation, and make sure that they go to communities on the ground that are doing some of the real work to protect and support biodiversity in some of the most important areas of biodiversity around the world that are being managed by a very, very small proportion of people, including a lot of indigenous wisdom keepers, with woefully few resources and woefully little attention to the work that they're doing. So I think that ability to coordinate and really see what all the various different parties are doing towards shifting both the dialogue and the belief systems, but also some of these underlying data structures and the interoperability around those data structures, with incentives baked in so that we're getting the resources flowing to where they're most needed. I think that again is a big part of what we're seeing with the with the advent of blockchain. And one final point I'll make is that what it's replacing is essentially supported by one might say the military power of some of the nation states that sort of exert this monopoly over force in order to sort of maintain a current system of financial flow. And that in sort of is a hidden cost, I think, of the current systems of centralized coordination. And decentralized approaches, yes, they will have their costs as well, but at least they're fairly transparent and upfront about the various different costs involved there.
Thanks, Tony. I realize that we're getting very close to the top of the hour. The whole session has just absolutely whizzed past, and I think it just shows what a rich space this is for exploration. I'd really like to loop back though and just hear maybe just like a final thought from Sam about, these themes have come up around agency, around purpose, belonging. Do you see a space for, the blockchain and what you've heard today in terms of tackling some of these planetary health challenges that you're working on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you for including me, and it's been just a huge treat to get to meet Nowella and Tony. And I really feel like this is the beginning of a conversation, not the conclusion of one. So, it always takes a long time for people from very different backgrounds and disciplines to have a productive conversation and just learn each other's language. So I think we're just getting started, but I'm really enjoying it. And I am, I've thought a lot about blockchain in the context of this idea of the great transition and the need to change how we're living, and that ultimately we're going to need to demand that all of the things that we consume, whether it's food or goods or energy, are coming in a way that has a really dramatically minimized ecological footprint, and how are we going to account for that, and the whole sort of need for life cycle analysis and sort of accounting. And so clearly there are lots of applications in very sort of prosaic ways like that, as well as in the sort of more abstract and really interesting ways that we were discussing earlier. So I think it's a really rich and fertile area for further discussions, and I appreciate being brought into them.
Great. Well, it's been so wonderful to have you all. I think this is a lesson to us that maybe an hour-long conversation isn't enough, but we're very excited to be continuing this series of conversations over the next 4 weeks. So this was the first where we've begun to explore some of the shared principles and common themes between blockchain and planetary health. Next week, we will be learning and deep diving a little bit more into communities and how we might build communities for planetary health and how the blockchain might support that. The following week, we will be thinking about governance and how governance might look both for planetary health and where the blockchain might be able to guide some governance structures. And then finally, we'll be hearing from some real life use cases of use of the blockchain in action for planetary health. Those are going to be at the same time as they've been this week, and you can find out some more information on the Planet.Health Twitter, which is at Planet.Health_X. And from there, that can also link into our website. Also, just to say that we will be deep diving into this conversation over an extended weekend in France for anybody who's able to join us, and that's going to be from the 20th until the 23rd of October. As I said before, all of the information is on the Twitter, and please just keep up to date with us. We're really hoping that this conversation will be fruitful and begin to have some real world impact. So thanks again very much to all of the panelists, Tony, Nowella, and Sam, and hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you might be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nowella. Thank you, Sam. Thanks very much, Rita.